Hello, my name is Dr. Morné Mostert. I'm the Director of the Institute for Futures Research at Stellenbosch University. South Africa finds itself at a very delicate point in its history. Perhaps at no time since 1994 has it been quite this delicate. Perhaps at no other time has it been so uncertain as it is today. Now, in the 1980s, higher education played a very active role in protest in South Africa. The place of learning, of higher order thinking, was actively involved in commenting on and proposing ways of understanding what was happening in the country of the time. As South Africa finds itself at this juncture in its history, where there are dramatic shifts in the stability of institutions in the country, where the cabinet reshuffles have caused increased international uncertainty about South Africa, and where in fact international ratings agencies have cast very serious doubt about the sovereign risk of this country, it is perhaps time again for higher education to rethink its role and in the progression of our society. And so, at the Institute for Futures Research, what can we do? Well, what we can do is we can talk about what we think is going on and perhaps help our fellow citizens to make sense of what's happening in the country at the moment. I had the privilege of presenting at the Organization for International Employers in Madrid last week, and I discussed with international delegates what the possible futures of South Africa might be, particularly as it might relate to work and economic development. Well, less than 72 hours after my return, South Africa finds itself in this delicate position, and we thought perhaps we could share some of those scenarios with our colleagues here in Africa. So what did we tell that audience? Well, the Institute embarked on an extensive research project to examine what really drives the future of this country. It's often true in Western societies that economics drives politics. In many African countries, and indeed in many other developing countries, it's quite the opposite. Politics drives economics. And we can see that in the South Africa of today, as political chicanery in our country has led to the kind of economic dilemma in which we currently find ourselves. For that reason, the kind of drivers of the future of South Africa have to contain elements of social evolution as well as those of paradigm. In social evolution, what we mean is the nature, the fabric, the architecture of the society. And by paradigms, we mean the very fundamental ways in which we might think. After extensive research, two of the dominant drivers that emerge for us is a continuum of, on the one side of the spectrum, collaboration and cohesion. That means we work together, we find ways of tackling our problems together, something really that philosophically here at the southern tip of Africa we should be intimately familiar with through our history with Ubuntu. On the one side of the spectrum, then, collaboration and cohesion. On the other side of the spectrum, factionalism. That means we all fight for our own little corner. Labour, government, business, civil society, academia, private individuals, all really combat each other in an attempt to find a corner where they can feel safe and their interests are somehow protected. Now, if we look at this as a continuum, where would South Africa find itself today? Well, I would say 7 days ago, perhaps, South Africa was somewhere here. In other words, quite factionalistic. South Africa is, unfortunately, widely considered to be one of the protest capitals of the world. Government relations with business is outside of the top 100 in the world, and so is relations between employers and employees. This, according to the most recent Global Talent Competitiveness Index. So South Africa is really quite a factional society. Over the last few days, I would argue that perhaps we have become more factional. At the very top end of our government, new factions have started to form. Factions that, in the view of many, in fact threaten the future of this country. On the other continuum, we felt that it's extremely important to understand the distinction between a paradigm of exceptionalism on the one side of the spectrum. What does that mean? Exceptionalism is really the philosophy that we are different. In 1994, South Africa really, to some degree, exploded this paradigm for itself. It had a kind of special status. And for a brief moment, that meant a great deal to us and was really quite a promising status to have. But the risk of an exceptionalist paradigm soon became clear as we began to justify deeply dysfunctional behavior based on the paradigm that we are different. We're a special case. We therefore have to follow special rules. On the other side of that continuum, we said it might be described as surfing the fourth industrial revolution. This is the internationalization dimension of the paradigm. So if on the one side we are deeply exceptionalist and we defend deeply dysfunctional behavior based on our exceptional status, on the other side of that spectrum, we surf the fourth industrial revolution. That means that we have joined international standards of ethics, of governance, of production. It means that we do not, in fact, try to remove ourselves from international coding conventions, from international bodies such as the International Criminal Court, and we hold ourselves accountable to international standards such as those set by Moody's, by Standard & Poor and the like. So, where were we 7 days ago? I would say that we were perhaps somewhere there. There was an enormous amount of dialogue, certainly from the side of government, that South Africa is a special case. It therefore deserves a special dispensation. And we were really at risk for deeply dysfunctional, unethical behavior to become defended based on this exceptionalist paradigm. People would simply argue that this is Africa, and more than that, this is South Africa. We need, for example, radical economic transformation. Now, when the IFR commented on the SONA comments by our president and referred to it as the rampant and rapid rise of radical economic ignorance, we were quite heavily criticized by those who supported the president. But as we can see, only a few weeks later, it was because we noticed the dots on the horizon of what might be coming. What's happened over the last few days? Well, I think there's a real risk that we may, in fact, have moved down this continuum as well. So, 7 days ago, we might have been somewhere there, quite factionalistic, quite exceptionalistic. My suspicion is that in the last few days, that has deepened to a more disturbing level of an exceptionalist paradigm and a more disturbing level of factionalism. And I would say South Africa finds itself at a deeply precarious point now, where it runs the risk of defending something like the Standard & Poor downgrade and the Moody's review approach by saying, for example, that those international bodies simply would rate us like that because they do not understand just how special and different we are. They do not support our radical economic transformation agenda. They have their own agendas, and for that reason they're downgrading us. That kind of argument is typical of an exceptionalist paradigm. Now, there have been some attempts in certain quarters to address some of these dimensions, and this is where the opportunity for South Africa now lies. We have seen from certain quarters in politics that perhaps there is a realization that a further move towards factionalism is in fact not the solution. There's an opportunity now to move towards a more collaborative, a more cohesive approach to tackling some of South Africa's problems, and that includes an approach by political parties for greater collaboration and cohesion. And it's going to be fascinating to see if parties are somehow willing and able to set aside their factionalist self-interest in the interest of a more collaborative approach. In terms of an exceptionalist mindset, there are those also in our country who believe that it is time for South Africa to join international standards of ethics, international codes of good governance, international bodies to which we can sign our allegiance and commit to the rest of the world, the outside world, those who provide us with that much needed foreign direct investment, that we do in fact see ourselves as a global competitor. So the opportunity now is for South Africa to move towards a more internationalized approach and towards a more cohesive approach. But there's one more paradigm that I would argue really drives the future of South Africa. It's partially because of our history. And a large number of people have in fact built enormous power bases and enormous wealth bases around the notion that South Africa's problems are simply not over. And for that reason, we must not look forward, which we would encourage as futurists, of course, but we would look backwards. And what does that mean in paradigmatic terms? Well, one of the implications is that South Africa may very well continue its pursuit of a redistributive paradigm. In other words, one that is really interested not in growth, which would be the opposite of that paradigm, but in redistribution. In other words, we simply look at the status quo and we subdivide that between the people of the country. But this is a possibility, in fact, for each of these scenarios. It is possible that there is a redistributive approach or a growth approach in each one of these scenarios. And then very quickly, we find ourselves in a situation where we can see at least 8 possibilities flowing for South Africa. Let's start with where perhaps we are today. One of the possibilities here is that we retain our exceptionalist mindset, we remain deeply functional, but we have, in addition to that, a redistributive mindset. In other words, we are not concerned with growth. This is perhaps the worst possible case scenario for South Africa. What we might refer to as the Hunger Games scenario, the worst possible case. One of the possible ways out is perhaps to consider that a movement towards growth might be the option. Another scenario is this one here, where South Africa is highly collaborative and cooperative, but it retains its exceptionalist mindset. The spirit in South Africa around 1994, 1995 reflects this kind of scenario. We're all feeling a sense of togetherness and belonging, but we defend our behavior still on this notion that we are somehow different. This rainbow nation status we have is something we deeply want to hang on to. And while that gives you a sense of somehow belonging to something special, the risk is that you simply do not hold yourself accountable internationally. So, within this scenario, it's possible also that we will continue our redistributive mindset. And in that scenario, the difficulty is, because we're such an exceptionalist, in such an exceptionalist paradigm in this scenario, that redistribution starts looking normal. Once again, one of the ways out of that scenario would be growth. It would still not be the perfect scenario, but at least it would move us towards a better reason for collaboration and cohesion. Let's look at some of the scenarios here. In this scenario, we're deeply factional, but we've also joined the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It sounds like a deep contradiction, does it not? What happens in practicality here is that some people have joined the internationalization process, but for most people, it's really a case of survival of the fittest. It's a case of factions fighting for the last few remaining crumbs, while a select few have flourished on the international stage. In that scenario also, it's possible to have a redistributive mindset. What happens here is that those who have in fact managed to be successful and internationalized are continuously disincentivized to do so because of a redistributive paradigm. And once again, a shift towards growth is the possibility. Now, let's look at the way out. What we have termed ecotopia. So called because it is at least partially utopian, and South Africa finds itself in a healthy space within the international ecology and has a healthy internal ecology. In this scenario, we are as a society much more collaborative and cohesive. And we can see some early signs of people across the racial divide, across the political divide, looking for people who can lead us towards greater cohesion and collaboration. In addition, we have joined the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and we have joined international standards of codes and practice of ethics and governance. And we have become signatories to international treaties that makes us prominent as an international role player. Now, if in this scenario we perpetuate a redistributive paradigm, we will miss the opportunity of the magic of ecotopia, and we will in fact be retarding our own progress. Our really true way out is a scenario in which we collaborate and develop cohesion. We have an internationalized agenda and serve the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And we are concerned with growth, not for the select few, but indeed for the successful and sustainability of all South Africans. South Africa finds itself at this very delicate juncture. We have choices to make. The choices are possible. They are available. We trust that those with power and influence will take a moment to reflect on the possibility for a future South Africa. I want to thank you for your time, for considering our scenarios. Because these scenarios were shared for the first time with the international world in Madrid, we are referring to this set as the Madrid Scenarios. It's important, also based on our own scenarios, that we have in fact shared these internationally. My name is Dr. Morné Mostert. I'm the Director of the Institute for Futures Research. If you'd like to find out more about our work, please feel free to contact us or simply share your views. Let's build cohesion for a more successful South Africa.